Can you guys hear me talking? No one can hear me?
I can.
I can.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is a problem because I can't see anything but you guys. Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Yep. I see a part of your lamp.
Okay, so if I turn this down, you see my hands?
Oh,
See the light.
The light.
You're seeing the light?
Yeah, so either turn your phone around or switch to like the reverse.
Oh, I see. Okay, I
Yeah.
got it. I just can't see how I'm in control. All I see is whoever is talking. I actually don't see my own control.
So you can, if you have a laptop, or I don't know if you just have the one device, but you can.
I only have the one device going because I can't get the other one. My microphone is muted. What is going on?
So I think if you click on where it says gallery view or speaker view, choose speaker view, and then that'll show who's speaking. And if we don't want to be the ones that everyone's looking at, we have to mute ourselves so that only Christina's the speaker in the middle.
Right, but I don't have the, I just.
Yeah, take your microphone out.
hi, Amelia.
Hey, Amelia.
How are you?
You're still muted, Christina.
Mute. There we go. Mute. Unmute. Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can make yourself the active speaker and like set it so that nobody else,
Okay.
else's
I
screen
don't know if you guys can hear me or not.
We can hear you.
It says that I left. Christina Lovisa left. So I have no idea what's going on, yet this is recording. I don't know what to say. I can kind of hear someone in the background. I hate to start this workshop and not know if you guys can see me.
Yes,
We can see you.
We can see and hear you.
How will I ever know?
Can you not hear us?
Just somebody put up a piece of paper for her to read.
Oh, good idea, Heather.
I can't see anyone. Just so you guys know, I can't see anyone. So somebody send me a text or an email and I can check that. If I open my other device. Oh, there, I can see you guys. I can see you guys in the other device. Now, okay, so this is great. So someone said, I can see you and hear you. So we can see you. Excellent. Thank you, Crystal. That's super helpful. Okay, so I think what's happened is, and Amelia, thank you. So on my laptop, I can see you all. And I see myself there as a participant as well. I'm going to try and activate the chat on my, here we go, on my device. I'll say hello, hello. Sorry guys, this is my first time doing this, and see if anybody can see the chat. If it's annoying to you to have the chat from me to everyone, I said hello. Oh, we can see it. Thanks, Amelia. Okay, so in that case, welcome everybody. That's really cool. So with the two devices going, I'll be able to do the class and look at you guys, and then you'll be able to see the project. I'm not going to look at my computer screen other than to answer questions. So the socialization stuff is cool, but we're going to have to stop it at some point soon because it's distracting to the class. So love you all. Thank you so much for joining me. And hello, and maybe we'll keep it open afterwards, or we'll do something so that everybody can say hi to each other. But for now, I should probably start this class so that we so that we get this going. All right, I'm going to flip this down soon, but first I'm going to start showing you how I roll with the punches. So how I roll with the punches is I actually had some wood set aside and I printed pictures, and then I had the whole thing all figured out, and then I realized I left my wood at home. So I found this other chunk of wood, and so what I'm going to do is, thankfully, I had my pictures printed in 2 different sizes. And there's a question, how do I make Christina big enough to see? That's what I was afraid of. So can anybody answer that question? Because on my phone, I am life size, and either Crystal or Amelia will be able to tell this. Tap on switch to active speaker. Okay, so
top right-hand corner of
the question was, how do I make Christina big enough to see? And the answer was tap on switch to activate speaker. It's in the top right-hand corner of the computer. So I hope that works for everyone. I see some people nodding, and I love some of the backgrounds some of you chose. That's super fun. That's really cool. Anyway, so you just get to see my unfinished paintings in the background. But okay, so we're talking about rolling with the punches. So this one is too big for the project that I'm doing because I would have to have a 17-inch set of eyes printed to fill this board. So what I'm going to do is, you guys are going to see me work on one end, and then when I get home, I'm just going to take a chop saw and cut that off. Okay, so even though my piece of wood looks way too large, it is. We're going to start with that. So this class is called Windows to the Soul, and the reason I chose to do this project is because when I first started doing mixed media, one of the things that I found most challenging was incorporating my photographs, to the point where when I would be selling a piece of artwork or something, and I'd have this painting, and then I'd have a piece of collage on there, and sometimes somebody would look at it and they'd say, wow, like, you're really talented. And I'd say, thank you. And then they would see the image and they go, oh, that's just a photograph. So that would bug me because it kind of diminished everything else I had just done in that painting. And like, the painting could have been massive, right? But that one little piece of photograph made that person react in a way that I felt like if I didn't learn to incorporate my images better, then I might always be faced with that little bit of discrepancy. So as I always say, I think that mastery, or one of the tools in mastery of mixed media, is being able to incorporate your images in the exact way you want it to be. So maybe, like in using the eye example, maybe you just want to paint one eye. Maybe you want to put a square around one and leave that one just a photograph. And this one you prefer to have, you know, close up and painted in and detailed as best you can. And then this one remain the photograph. So playing with your ability to incorporate. We did a little bit the other day with our edges, right? And this is now when you're working on top of the image itself. So it's not about the edges, which is why I've got you to work on something where the image is magnified. There you go. So Jan is asking if everyone could mute themselves so it doesn't crackle. Okay, you guys all got that? So if everyone could mute themselves, then it doesn't crackle. Maybe I need to mute myself on my, I'm afraid to touch anything on my laptop.
No, don't mute yourself. No.
Where is the mute on the laptop?
No.
Down in the bottom?
No.
No, I'm muted.
Christina?
Okay, so my laptop is muted.
No,
I
Christina.
hope that resolves a crackle issue for you guys. Let me know if it does, because that would be really distracting, I think. I'll do whatever I can on my part. You're good. Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. It's nice having Amelia and Crystal who are like facilitating this meeting. I should have had co-hosts here to help us. So thank you to my team, my IT team from both of you from Southern Ontario. Okay, so what I was saying is incorporating the image from the outside is what we did the other day, but now we're going to be talking about incorporating the image itself, okay? And there's so many ways we can do this. And in this project, I'm just going to teach you how to actually incorporate and paint on top and do that sort of thing using eyes. The reason I chose eyes is because when you're talking about body parts and things like that, it's challenging to get things without looking like a cartoon, right? So one of my participants that I know, Dulce, I've been trying to teach her this for years. When she was incorporating faces and people into her artwork and paint on top, she always said that her faces always ended up looking like, you know, like really amateur and very, very cartoon-like. So, but over the years, she's perfected and developed her technique. And then what I realized and what I took away from that is I wasn't teaching it right in the first place. So that's why we're going to be going right back to the basics here. And I'm going to show you exactly what I do to make this work. Now I'm going to flip my camera down and I'm just going to adjust myself here to make sure that you guys can get in close enough to see. There we go. And then I'm not sure if I can zoom, so I may have to just bring the tripod arm down a bit. Like I said, seasickness is sometimes my specialty. All right, so that is the side I'm working on. My hand is here, so that is that side. This is my top, that is your top. Just want to make sure we're all good. Yep, excellent. Okay, so I'll try not to move it out of the screen. Let me know if I do. All right, so what I did this morning was I printed off 2 sets of eyes in the same image, but 2 sizes. And you can see what happened on this one. I dropped a little bit of water. So this is an inkjet, and inkjet is water-soluble ink. So you can see that I've already gone and distorted that eye by accident. So the first thing that always needs to be done is you want to protect your paper, okay? So protecting your paper is only as difficult as dry time allows, so to speak. So for today, what we're going to do is if you have, I put that on your supply list, if you happen to have the Liquitex clear gesso, I don't even have any. I looked around my studio and I've completely run out. So I have used the acrylic ground for pastels. Make sure you guys can read that. So it's by Golden, and that's acrylic ground for pastels. The Liquitex clear gesso is, if I can find an empty bottle at some point, I may show it to you, but it's, I can even put it in the chat, or someone else can. The Liquitex clear gesso is what I tend to use most often. I'm going to show you how to use it. I'm going to show you on this one because I've already gone ahead and done it on this one because I wanted it to dry. So both products protect your paper. And if you don't have access to either of those things, and I told you it was fine, don't worry about it. What you can protect your painting with is a little bit of gel medium, or a little bit of Mod Podge, or a little bit of something. Matte medium is ideal, but a little bit of something that is not going to saturate your paper so that it becomes soggy wet. So, so if I had, let me try to find a, I think I might have something that might satisfy both audiences. Let me just look a little bit. I wish I could say talk amongst yourselves, but there's nothing to say when I've muted everyone. Oh, here we go, great. Okay, so I do have a gloss medium here. And like I said, if it was matte, it would be even better. But what you're going to want to do, since this one is runny, we're not going to put it right onto our paper. We're going to put it onto another surface. For those of you who know me, you know that I paint on my table all the time. So I'm just going to apply a little bit to the table. If you have a palette, you can apply it there. And you want to use a very fine bristled brush. Okay, so the difference between this brush and I'll show you this brush, a painter's brush. So you see these painter's brush like for painting walls and things like that. We're going to try not to use these things too often for two reasons. One, they absorb way too much of your product. So one pass into that and it just sucks everything up and then it's all wasted. All your material is wasted in your brush. So try to avoid using painter's brushes unless you're painting huge, massive surfaces and you're moving things around quickly. Always go for artist brushes. And if you can find artist brushes in the size that suit your size of panel, then you want to use things that are comparable in size. So I have a very fine, I think this might be badger hair or something. So I'm going to use a very soft bristle brush. Use what you have. You're learning this technique. And then all I'm going to do with the gloss is I'm picking up the gloss on my brush on both sides. And then on here, I'm going to, actually I'm going to cut off the good one so that I don't damage it too. So take your image and then we'll talk about sizing and all that afterwards. I just want to get you protecting this while we're doing this. So I'm going to protect the bad side with one product and then I'll use the gesso on the other product. So all I'm doing is I'm brushing on a thin coat. And then I'll take a hair dryer or a heat gun, well, maybe not a heat gun, an embossing gun, and I just want to seal that. So if you have inkjet, if you add a lot of the product to it, meaning if you just poured it on top, what would happen is the same thing that happened with this water droplet is that it'll saturate your paper and it'll smear your colors because the inks are water soluble in inkjet. So just be careful that you don't apply too much, right? So just a little dab will do you. Then you brush that on and then you can go ahead and dry that up if that's what you're using. If you are using the Liquitex Clear Gesso or the grounds for pastel, I still prefer, by the way, if you are going to go out and buy one of these products, I still prefer the Liquitex Clear Gesso, just so that we're clear. This one is good, but I painted my other one this morning, so it would be dry and it's still pretty wet. So, and I'm going to protect the other side with the other ground. So this ground will provide, and the Liquitex Clear Gesso will provide more tooth. Okay, so what that means is that when I feel this one, it's going to be, when it's dry, it's going to be nice and smooth. When I feel this side, it's going to feel like sandpaper. But it's still, whoops, it's still going to be very transparent. Okay, providing, here's the big providing that we apply it in the correct manner. So they call this stuff clear, but if you look at it in the Liquitex Clear Gesso, if I were to put it on like that, you can see it's not very clear at all. Okay, so the key to these grounds and the clear gesso is to apply it very thinly. So you just want to keep brushing it out and not putting it on too thick, but making sure you have a very thin, even coat. This is where it's really important to have a soft brush, because if you don't have a soft brush, then you're going to see your brush strokes. And if you see your brush strokes, then they're going to dry like ridges, okay, because it's so thick. Now, if the question comes in, what if I don't have any soft brushes today? Great question. All you have to do is apply it with the brush you have and then take your finger after it's on there for a minute and just start to smooth it out. So I smooth in one direction, then I let it dry a few seconds, then I'll flip it around and I'll smooth it in the other direction. And then I'll keep doing that until it's perfectly clear. So the Liquitex clear gesso doesn't go perfectly dry until it's, no, that was backwards. The Liquitex clear gesso doesn't go completely clear until it is 100% dry. So you can see that my gel medium side, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but it's quite glossy, and this side is quite matte. So either way, the paper is going to be protected from any water droplets or anything like that. So while that's drying, and you can use a hair dryer, whatever, if you want to speed it up, we can talk a little bit about choosing the right image for, in this case, for the board that you're painting, but also when you're incorporating for other projects. So incorporating something like eyes is very interesting because we don't want to see the sides or the shape of the face or anything like that. So when you're cutting your image, you want it to actually not be too wide set. So what I might do is I might trim down some of this image just a little bit so that it fits my board that much better. Now on this side, I might leave it a little wider, and that's only because I have to cut the board later and finish that up. So that's not a technique I recommend, cutting your board later, by the way, but you know what? You gotta roll with the punches sometimes. So I am going to cut my image down to size, and I chose the larger one. First of all, so that you guys could see, but also so that, there we go, take that off, but also so that most of the board is covered with the eyes. So if I have a lot of skin to paint and a lot of that sort of thing, it's going to be difficult, especially with this image, because I don't have a lot of other details. The picture was never really that crisp and clear in the first place. So let's say you've printed an image of an animal that has fur and different things like that. That works really well because you've got extra things, right, to focus on. So in this case, I don't even have the nose because you'll see what happens when I wrap this. So I have to keep this fairly centered and fairly close up because otherwise I have a lot of skin to deal with. And in my image, I don't have a lot of those highlights and shadows and things like that. So I have to make up some of this. And it's funny that I just used the word make up some of this because we're going to be applying color almost like makeup. So we'll get back to that later. But when selecting your image, make sure you position it so that you have just the eyes to focus on. If you're using eyes, if you guys are using something different, or if you're doing just one eye or something like that, you want to make sure that your image covers most of the board surface that you're using. And if you're using a frame, make sure you take that little piece of backing out and then trace around, and then that's what you're going to cut. So in this case, I'm going to trim off this, and I'm doing it just by folding. And I'm going to fold. And if some of you are still drying your thing up with your image up with a hair dryer, then we'll wait. We have patience. So it's a good thing to have patience sometimes because this project is a bit tedious when it comes to patience. So you're going to want to use brushes that are scaled to the size of your image. And then you're going to want to apply things a little more slowly than we normally would. So the other day when we did the image incorporation, and I was telling you guys that your best ally in that case is to slow things down, right? Don't apply big gobs of paint. So now you can see I have my image. It's funny, it's almost the same color as the plywood. And I have it placed on the board exactly where I want it. So I hope everybody is caught up. Tell me if I'm going too fast for you. I don't know about the dry time. I didn't do dry time on mine because I wanted to have this ready for you guys so I wouldn't have to turn on my embossing gun and make too much noise for you. So, like if I were to touch this, my gel medium side is dry, but the other product, the ground for pastels, is not dry yet. So I find that product a little bit more challenging, I guess, to work with. Actually, I just had an idea because some of you might be working with gel medium or with Mod Podge or with something to seal your paper. And I've only got the one thing on this, so I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll just add a little bit of that to, whoops, to my other side so that you'll be able to, I'll be able to walk everybody through the entire thing. So I'm just going to put a little gel medium on one side and dry that up. So nobody's left out. We're all in this together. Who here's with me on the fact that during this isolation, if you haven't stocked up for an apocalypse in your art supplies, you're running out of things by now and you're improvising like crazy. That's where I'm at. It's getting kind of funny. I was at home and I wanted to glue something down, and I actually did make a very, very quick paste. Remember from when you were kids and you made the flour and the water paste? I actually did a little flour and water paste because I had to stick something down quickly. Okay, I'm going to turn this on and it's probably going to be super loud, so apologies. All right, so it's kind of dry. We'll go with kind of dry. Kind of dry is better than not dry at all. Okay, so now you're going to need your glue. So I've put in the supply list that any kind of glue will work. So we've been talking about this a lot, is that I used to use a lot of wallpaper paste mixed with a little bit of Mod Podge in it. And I then ran out of Mod Podge, and so I bought white glue, and then I bought some wallpaper paste, and so I've got this weird mixture of all kinds of things going on right now, and then I diluted it with water. Whatever you have for glue, the same rule applies as I'm always talking about, is that glue likes to stick to glue. So on the back side, I'm applying a thin but, okay, you getting this? A thin but even and thorough coat of glue. So I'm going to keep brushing it off to make sure I don't have it too thick. I think what happened in one of the last videos, somebody was telling me that they applied their glue too thick and it wound up destroying the image. So you want to have a nice thin coat, both on the back of the paper and on the surface, the wood in this case, that's receiving the paper. So glue likes to stick to glue, always. And the reason for that is that if we only put glue on one surface, they both compete for the moisture. And then when it dries, you can have air bubbles. So we're going to try to avoid air bubbles here by doing a thin, even coat on both pieces. And now we're going to push these two things together. And your paper is fragile. Okay, I'm going to say that very slowly and again so everybody hears me. Your paper at this point is super fragile. And that's because we just sealed it and it's still got moisture in it, even though it may feel dry to the touch. And then we've just added glue now. And so it is also made it more fragile. So I put a paper towel on, and all I'm doing is I'm pushing it down nice and flat first. And then I'm going to take my little credit card or my reward card or whatever you can find. Even a scrap of cardboard will do if you have none of those things. I'm going to put the paper towel down You could also put down, you know, a piece of wax paper or anything like that. We're just going to gently push out any excess glue. So that's why in the first place we wanted to do a thin, even coat, is so we don't have a lot to remove. So moisture is going to be the enemy in this project, for a couple of reasons. One, we're going to do a lot of dry brushing and a lot of like sort of makeup applying. And if we're doing that and we've got too much water, then we're going to end up either A, destroying our paper, or two, it's going to end up looking a little bit fuzzy, maybe like a bit like a watercolor. So, and if that's the effect you're going for, then carry on, kids. Okay, so now I have this thing attached. Just gonna make sure you guys can still see. Yes, you can. I'll remove that paper. There. All right, so now that we have this paper adhered, the next trick is to really dry it up. So I'm gonna add a little heat to it. This is where I'm gonna caution you guys with the heat gun. So those of you who only have heat guns, what happens when we apply too much heat is that we dry out the glue on the back of the paper, or we dry out the glue that's from the wood, and then the two separate because we've dried out that glue in one spot rather than evenly. And then that's how you get air bubbles. And so those air bubbles come from too much heat. So if you have a hair dryer, in this case, it's much better than a heat gun. And an embossing gun is also fine, but it's a bit hotter. So I'm going to have to I'm going to distance myself, or not myself, my board. Holy smokes. I'm going to distance my board from the embossing gun so that I'm not creating too much heat in one spot. All right, so it's still not cured, right? So it feels dry to the touch, but it's not cured. So again, remembering your paper is a bit fragile at this point, and it's also still got a lot of moisture in it. So we have to be super careful when we're applying our paints and things like that. If you do have a project like this that you are doing, sort of you're incorporating something like this into your images later when you're working in a different project or whatever, it's best to let this part dry. So once you adhere your image and it's been protected, it's best to leave that for a little while, even a few hours, right? So that always helps. Some of you know that when I'm talking about in our classes about leaving things dry or leaving things wet, sorry, so that when you come back to it, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So if you want to leave some drips or some paper or something that's best dealt with once it's dry, then this would be an ideal thing to, you know, go have your lunch and then come back to it kind of thing. But for the sake of this video, we just sped up the drying a little bit. If anybody has any air bubbles or anything, somebody sent me a message in Messenger. Huh. So if somebody is in the chat that just sent me a message in Messenger that's supposed to be here, I apologize, I can't read that. If anybody has the ability to pop over to our group and see what maybe someone can't connect, I would super appreciate that. I think it was Lucy, but I don't know that Lucy is on the chat. So Sophie, maybe you could check in on Lucy. Maybe she lost the link or something. Anyway, she should be able to see it. If not, maybe she's just not able to join. Anyway,
I'm there.
I feel bad when all my little sheep feel like they've wandered off. Okay. If we can get Lucy back in, great. If she lost somehow, I apologize. All right, so I have this ready to go now for the next step.
I'm there, Christina.
So dispensing some paint on your palette. So I'm going to move my palette maybe to the middle so that it's going to be really hard for you guys to see because my palette is such a freaking disaster. So yeah, so that's a challenge. Maybe what I can do is put a piece of paper over it or something. I'll get a piece of white paper so that you can actually see what I'm dispensing. There we go, that's a little better. Okay, so obviously paint is not very good on paper, but I don't need a lot right now. I'm just going to dispense a little amount of all different colors. So looking at your image, right? So looking at your image, we want to pick out all the colors. So, oh, Lucy's here. Excellent. Thank you. I just saw that, Sophie. Thank you very much. Okay, so when you're looking at your image, if some of you have flesh tone in there, you're going to want to pick out colors. If you don't have flesh tone, you're going to want to pick out pretty much a nice little palette of colors. So I don't have any flesh tone, but I do have a couple different pinks. So I might dispense a few different pinks. Whoops, that one has to be shaken. And again, if you don't have pink, you certainly have red and you have some white. Don't mix them together yet because we just want, you wouldn't know it by looking at my palette before, but I do a circular palette. So it's just a little habit I've developed because that way I always have every color on hand that I may end up using. And even though there's no yellow directly in my image, there could be yellow in a skin tone. There could be yellow in trying to develop a color. So my paints are really terrible. I have to take off all the lids. Somebody hasn't been storing their paints very thoughtfully. Whoops. So a little circular palette of all kinds of colors. So this was my son when he was, one of my sons, when he was very little, and I think he was just 1. And so his face hasn't really developed, obviously, any wrinkles or any, a lot of definition even by that point, right? So my challenge is mostly going to be with, not with the eyes, because the eyes are the part that gives me the most detail, even though the image itself isn't very detailed. But the what's the way to put it? The skin doesn't have like a lot of, you know, he at that point had never had a suntan, he'd never had a sunburn, he'd never had any of those things. So it's I hope you guys have chosen something a little bit better than I chose this morning. I had the issue that in our last workshop, I did a painting with one son who went to, or he was on his first day of kindergarten. And when I showed him that picture, that painting that I did, and then his brother lives in BC, and so he said to me, he said, "See, I always knew you loved me more." And so the reason he said that was because I chose a picture of him and not of his brother. So today I thought I'd even it out a little bit by doing the brother. Okay, so you see what I'm doing? I'm creating a little circular palette of just a little bit of pink, and it's not a lot of each color, but it is a wide variety of colors, because I don't know when I might pick up a little of this and a little of that. It's all just going to be part of the same color. And don't worry if you don't understand that concept yet. It will become clearer as I start to add a bit more color to this. Now white, I always keep my white sort of separate off to the side because I make a real mess with my white. And so once it is somewhat destroyed, I'm going to have to just put a little bit more. So I'm going to keep my white off to the side. Boy, some of my paints are getting pretty dried up. This is like old stock stuff that I haven't paid attention to for so long. Now I'm pulling out old inventory like some of you probably are. This whole lockdown's been very good for waste not, want not, right? Like old art supplies. Everything gets used. I think I've used every panel and canvas in my studio. Okay, so white's on the side. And I think I'm going to do another pale yellow. I don't have any yellows. Oh yeah, I do have that one sort of mustard yellow. So if you're looking at my palette, you can see that these colors are not evident in the making of skin tone, right? So that's okay. That's what we're doing here. We're here to create, I'll leave that. We're here to create a variety of colors that will eventually form our ideal colors. I'm going to put that aside now and bring the painting back. I can't wait to see what you guys are all doing because I'm so impressed always by the time I'm done these workshops and you guys post what you've done. It blows my mind. Actually, now I can see you. So if anybody wants to hold up their start, I would love to see them. Not everyone is in the chat. Oh, I got some. Lucy's got her eyes up there. Oh, Margot, that's so sweet. And then Tom's got some sexy eyes going on there. I love it. Sue's got 2 eyes, different eyes. You guys are all great. I can't wait. Oh, and then Sophie's trying the owl. I wondered who might try the owl. Crystal's got, ooh, like a partial face. That's super cool. So, and then Emmy's got eyes as well. Awesome. You guys, Dulce's got eyes. Looks like a model. So you guys are going to be great. I really can't wait to see these finished. So remember, here we go. This is how we're going to start this, but it's going to be slow and steady, right? No one's going to pick up a whole lot of paint and slap it down. It's just going to be lots and lots and lots of subtle little layers. So your water, keep your water handy, but also keep a paper towel handy because when we pick up water, we're going to dry the brush, okay? We don't want a lot of water in this because you saw how water destroyed that image so quickly that I had, right? One little drop and whoop, it was gone. We've protected our image, but it's not bulletproof. It is definitely still vulnerable to moisture and water and all that stuff. So I taught myself this technique and I have no other way to call it other than paint by numbers, even though you don't see a number on there, where you're going to use the highlights and the shadows, okay? So not necessarily, I mean, yes, colors incorporated, but we're using the highlights and the shadows to start painting these colors and things. So I'm gonna start with one eye. And the reason I'll start with one eye is because if I start with the skin, this is the part that I said might cause me a lot of grief. So I might end up maybe leaving some of the skin. I might end up doing that more subtle. I'm gonna leave that for now. If any of you are choosing to do something a little more intricate, meaning that let's say you want one eye to be real and one eye to be painted, that sort of thing, that's all great. Just you don't have to decide that right now. Just right now, just choose one eye, or I think you're all doing eyes. So just choose one eye over another. And then I'm going to start with a smaller brush, a smaller round, just because it feels comfortable to me based on the size of what I've got going on here. And I'm going to start with the white of the eye. So when you start looking, my image is not very clear. I hope some of you, it looks like you've got much better printouts than I do. I do. So I am going to pick up my paint like this. I'm just going to put my paint on my brush, and then I'm going to brush it out and around and through the palette. What I'm doing is I'm actually forcing it into the bristles. There's nothing dripping, obviously, because the bristles have the paint in them. Twirl it in there. Get that paint into those bristles. Okay? And so it still might, depending on which paint you're using, it still might be too opaque. So this is where I tend to just dip very lightly into a bit of water. And then I'm just going to, again, work that into the bristles, or touch it on your paper towel or something like that. We want the paint to be in there but not totally dry. And then the only way to test it is to go into your image, and then using the white of the eye, start to very lightly color in the white. Now, if some of you have more detailed whites, when you get to the darker part, we'll add that darker shadow later, but just go up towards it. So my white is nice. It's not really super bright. I'll load my brush again. So I'm going to dip it into the water first this time. Then I'm going to pick up the paint and I'm going to brush it out. So that looks to me like it's going to be heavy. I'm just going to keep brushing it out or blot it on a paper towel. I don't want anything too heavy. And I'm going in, I'm just going to start putting in that highlight first. So if it looks like a cartoon, then you probably, your paint's a bit too opaque. So dip it in the water and then blot it on your paper towel, pull it out, and thin out your paint. And it's all, everybody's is going to be a bit different depending on the consistency of your paint. There we go. So you can see how much brighter this eye is to this eye, but it doesn't look like paint, right? I haven't exactly painted it yet. I'm dipping into my water again. I'm going to pick up a bit of paint and do the same thing. This time I'll blot it on paper towel. And then I'm going to crisp up the areas that are crisp and have a highlight. So what we're looking for is the whitest part. And I'm just going to pull that through and draw the shape. So now on the outside of the eye, I have a darker spot, but where I've just got this little junction, I don't know if you guys can see that, where I have this little junction between my first paint and then my second paint, I'm just going to use a different brush, and then I got it wet, blotted on paper towel, and now I'm going to use it to just soften that. So by softening that, I'm blurring the lines literally between the two shades. Okay, so it's very, very subtle. Now when I show you this eye and then I show you this eye, can you see that difference? So I've made that one really pop with just a little bit of paint, yet it doesn't look like a cartoon character. So now it does look out of place because it's the only color we've got in here. But now I'm going to do the darker parts of the eye. So that would be around the outside. So I'm going to take the same brush that I had the white, and I dip the brush, still with the paint in it, in water. If you've already thrown your paintbrush in water, don't worry, just take it out and blot it. It doesn't need to be super clean because we're good with the white because we want to pick up more white. Brush it out like that. And then we want to pick up a little something that's going to be in the corner of the eyes. So for you guys, you might notice different subtle colors. I'm going to pick up a little gray. And I'm talking, look at the subtle difference here. It's very, very, very slight. And I might pick up a little bit of another color. This is why I keep my palette full, because I can adjust my color, but it's very subtle. I'm not going for a huge color change at this point. I'm going for a very subtle one. And so now I'm going to put in, oh, it's too light. So now I'm going to go back, pick up a little more of my gray. I was a little light on that gray. I might even pick up a teeny bit of brown in it. So you'll notice when you start to apply right away if it's the right color or the wrong color. There we go. So now I have like more of like a taupey color, but it's still in the vein of white.
Heather,
But
Layla,
if some of you are doing both eyes at the same time, then
you-
you're going to be more likely to very accurately get the same color. So go ahead and do that if that's of any interest to you. If you're going to leave one eye, then that's fine. So now you can see I have what looks like an outline. So this is typically what happens when I see people paint over their paintings, is that there's no blending going on between the two colors, right? So if I can hold that up closer, you can see there's no blending between that white and that gray. So I'm going to pick up a bit of white on a clean paintbrush. This is not the same paintbrush. Blot it on my paper towel. Again, I want the bristles wet but not dripping any water. And I'm just going to pull that gray from the outside into the white. Not all the way across, very subtly. And that's going to be enough of that. Now your eyes are all going to be different. Like I said, mine doesn't have a lot because he's only 1 year old at this point. So he doesn't have a lot of color changes or issues or anything going on with his eyes. So I'm going to let you guys go ahead and determine in yours if you need more color or less color. But I am going to get in and do just a little more contouring around the eye, even though it doesn't exist. So I'm picking up a little bit darker of the last shade I did. So, and then again in the water, and I'm just going to put it right in the corner and right in the corner. There we go. Now clean brush, water. Remember, get your bristles wet and then dry it up on your paper towel or blot it on your paper towel and then go back in and just blend. So look at how subtle we're doing this, right? Like we're not at all, let me see if I can get this. So this is the good, or, ooh, there we go. This is the one eye. And then this is the other eye that hasn't been painted. So let me see if I can get something to prop this up a little closer for you guys. There we go. There, that should work. So, and I'll adjust the light so that you can see. Awesome. So I'll keep bringing it closer because that seems to be working. I'm so glad that I can see my own screen here. Okay, so if you're working on both eyes, we'll give you a minute to work on that. If you're just working on the one eye with me, then we'll start to look at some of the other colors that are in the eye itself. So you'll notice that like in this eye, there's a lot of white in this blue, and there's also a highlight in the middle. I'm actually not going to paint those in first. I'm going to paint those in later. So it's not that I always start with the white of the eye, but in this case, it's a subtle way, or it's an easy way for me to teach you, because now we're getting into, so white everybody understands, right? When you look at the white of an eye, you're probably noticing that there's so many other shades other than just white. And that's the problem with a lot of times when people paint, they paint skin one color, right? Like it's either white or it's light brown or whatever it is. We tend to paint, sometimes when we're painting over an image, we tend to see things in one shade only. Now, when you start to pick apart an eye and we're just looking at the white, it's incredible how many colors and how many shades are in there. So when you lay down the white first, start to notice all the subtleties. And then as you go out further, you're starting to see that shading, which is giving us volume, right? So that eye gets volume based on the shading that we're providing. All right, so make sure you can still see. Good. All right, so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add one more little detail in that eye. And that's not because it's there, but it's just because I want to put a little more volume. So that's the liberty we have, right? We can take liberties with this painting, and we can add things, and we can take things away. So I'm going to add a little bit of contrast into the corner of the eye. So I'm just doing this for volume because I imagine that on a real eye, this would probably be dark. And it's not that my son doesn't have real eyes. It's just that in this photograph, it doesn't show. So I am giving what I know to be true in an eye a bit of shape. Now, it looks really dark, and it is, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to soften that. So I have two ways I can soften it. So I added just a little bit of like a dark, like a bit of black and gray, and then a teeny bit of the blue that I'm going to pick up from the rest of the eye. So I added that to the corner. And I can go back in with my brush and I can remove that, or soften it rather. Or if you have a baby wipe, you can just gently blot. So when I'm blotting, I'm not wiping, I'm just blotting. So that's going to help me soften for sure the contour of the eye. And then if I had a Q-tip, I might even go in and just erase that harsh line. But because I don't have a Q-tip on me, what I'm going to do is, again, improvise. And I'm just wetting a brush. And then I'm going to go in and take the water out, and I'm just removing that little bit of a line. So there was a little bit of like a barrier line that was there. And I just wanted to remove that so that it didn't look out of place. So now that eye has a lot more contour, a lot more volume, and a lot more shape. Now I'm going to look at the iris part, okay? So the way I do an iris part is I'm going to start with the outside and move in. So in this case, pull up my palette again so you guys can see the palette. I'm going to pick up, are we too close? No, you're good. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of gray, a little bit of the dark blue. I'm looking at the eye itself, the actual color of the eye, but don't just look at the color of the eye, look at the outside. It's almost like there's a halo, right? A ring around the eye. And in some cases it might be very black, and that's okay. So we're doing the same thing. We're loading up the bristles. Make sure they get nice and coated in paint, but now we have way too much paint on our brush. So we're going to do the same thing, dip it in a bit of water, just dip, and then blot it on paper towel, get all that moisture out. Okay, now we're going to go in and start to contour from the inside of the eye, and I'm going to have to rotate this to get a proper contouring job. So you have to do this very slowly, especially because the iris itself is perfectly circular. And if you make it distorted at all, a different shape, then it's going to be weird. If that accidentally happens to you, then just go ahead and wait till it dries, and then we'll clear up with the white on the other side. So don't panic too much. And now I'm going to go around the top, because the top part, I've kind of flattened it a little bit, but that's okay. So on the top part, we're going to make that a circle in a moment. So now, this time, if you have a real outline, again, you're going to clean, wet brush, blot it on paper towel, and blend. When I say blend, you're almost erasing, right? Because we're just erasing that harsh line from where our brush was. There we go. And don't forget, now you can start to take Okay, so did you guys read that? Heather, you have to mute your microphone. Heather, Heather, Heather. I'm not sure which Heather, but Heather has to mute her microphone, please, because her music came on. Done. Awesome. Thank you. I guess you guys can all still see the chat. That's great. Okay, so now that I've got that part done, now I'm going to concentrate a little more on the actual iris. But I notice in my picture that that same color that's on the outside is also right in the middle around the pupil. Okay, so if I show you right up close, let me get it so that you can see it. Wrong way, doing everything backwards here. Come on, Lovisa, get it together. It's like doing everything in reverse. Okay, where's my camera? There. Good grief. Sorry guys, I shouldn't try this. Don't try this. I need my techies here to help me. There we go. All right, so that's where the eye is. So you can see that this outside part in mine, right? Like we're just observing. So your eye is going to be very different than the eye I'm working on. But the eye I'm working on, the middle part is exactly the same color as the outer part. So I'm just going to go ahead and color that part the same way I did. So I'll pick up that black blue color on a wet brush, blot it on my paper towel, and I'm just going to go in and I'm going to add that same to the middle. And I accidentally went over the white, but that's okay because I know where the white is because I did such a subtle amount of color. Wrong way. There we go. Excellent. Okay. So looking at these two eyes, now I'm going to deal with the middle part. So I'm going to take my same black-blue mixture, bring my palette up again so you guys can see it. I'm going to take my same black-blue mixture, and now I'm going to pick up some white and just start to mix it in. So this is where you can start to have a little bit of fun because now you can start adjusting and playing with the colors. So if you want to change the eye colors at all, you want to make them more green, you want to make them more aqua, this is where you can just play with it a little bit, and you want to load up that brush. This is a bad brush. I'm going to get a different brush. If anyone's wondering why that was a bad brush, is the bristles were too short, so they were a little bit on the fatter side. So I went for a longer bristle brush. And I'm going to just play with adding a bit more color until I say, hey, that's a nice blue. There we go. So now I'm going to work it into my bristles. Remember, your bristles always have to be completely saturated with color, but not with water. And then I'm going to go ahead and blot it on my paper towel. So now I have no paint dripping and it's super dry. And mine may be a bit light, but that's okay because I can go in and I can add a darker one. At least you can see. I'm going up to that black line and I'm leaving a little bit of space. Not that black line, you know, our darkest part of the eye, the outline. I'm going up to that and up to the dark circle part as well. So I'm glad I went a little bit lighter because this is really illustrating nicely how cartoon-like this eye can be, right? It's because of the contrast. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take a brush, dip it in water, clean water, dry it, and now I'm going to very subtly blur those lines between the color that I just added and that outline. Chose a brush that's too fat again, so I'm going to choose a different brush. Don't be afraid to change your brushes if it's not working. You don't have to stress yourself out working with something that is just not doing it for you. That's a better brush. And I'm just sort of erasing that line. I'm softening it and blending it at the same time. And I'm just making sure that I don't have that, there we go, that difference. So if you can see this one now, it's still lacking that dot in the middle. And then also if you look at this one, there's like a lighter part. We're gonna wait to do that one in a minute. So on this eye, I've softened. Now some of you may notice, like depending on how clear your picture is, you may have like those little white squiggles and all that stuff. Leave all that stuff, those details for later. If your paint's been translucent enough, you should still be able to see some of that through. And if you can't, then you might even just with a baby wipe, blot it a little bit. And blot, we're not actually wiping, right? And that'll help soften that so that you can still see any little wiggly lines and things. And now, because we're going to deal with some of that when it's drier, now I'm going to go back in and I'm just going to add that highlight to the middle of the eye. And so I'm going to do it with white. And then I'm going to show you how I'm going to go back in now and just add a little contouring to the eye where I messed up. So where it was a little off circular, I'm going to add a little white. I'm just going to let that dry for a second. So this is the first layer that I've kind of put on there in a thicker paint, meaning that I didn't dip it in water and I didn't just thin it out. I just put white directly on, and you can see it's quite harsh. But I'm doing that for a reason, and that's because I want to actually leave that highlight there so that I can see it. Soften that one a little more so that I can see it in contrast to the rest of the eye. So that really shows me how many colors are actually in an eye, right? Now I'm going to take a wet brush, again a clean wet brush, damp or blot it on your paper towel. And now I'm going to subtly and slowly move that white out. So in the middle, I'm not going to do that because I have nowhere to move it, right? So in the middle, I'm actually just going to blot it. So if you have too much paint, you end up blotting, then just go ahead and use a baby wipe or something and move it. But now I have a really nice highlight right in the middle. And now you can start to see that compared to the two, or even compared to like to the rest of the skin tone and all that, it's taking on a different look, right? Like it doesn't look completely like a photograph anymore. It looks like you've painted it, but it looks a little out of place because in comparison to the rest of the skin. That's why we want to do some more blending and some more painting with the rest of it, because if you just do the eye, then that is really specifically what you're asking your viewer to focus on. So like I was saying earlier, if you wanted to leave it at that, like all you wanted to do was paint one eye or one element of an image, if you had another image and you just wanted to paint out one element of it and leave the rest photographed, this is a great way to do it. Amelia actually had a very interesting, yesterday, she took some photographs and then she was digitally coloring them. And this is also a great way to do that within your work without it being digital. So if you collage on a black and white image or something like that, and you want to color one specific part, then you would know how to do it now. Alternatively, if you had a color image, but you wanted one area to look hand painted, this is what you would do. And then in contrast to what's surrounding it, you can see the difference already within your own work. So let's give that eye a little bit more volume right now. So what you're wanting to have in your work is the scruffiest brush you can find. So the way I create scruffy brushes, look around to see what you have. And what do I mean by that? I mean short bristles, and they're quite dense. They're not very pliable. So one of the ways I create scruffy brushes, I'm going to show you right now, is I take my cheapest brushes, these are dollar store brushes, and I usually just trim them down pretty short. And I cut them pretty level, trim it up, and then I do exactly what you're not supposed to do with brushes, is just completely destroy them and mash a bunch of paint right into the ferrule, which is this part here. And then you're gonna really make a mess of this paintbrush. So, and the more paint you get into this brush, so I picked up some paint, now I'm really gonna work it in. Like I'm really gonna wreck that brush. So I have a bunch of these scruffy brushes lying around and they keep getting shorter and shorter. And so you can see this is one of my favorites. It's like a really small, dense brush, but it's got lots of little scruffy bristles. And if your brush is too fat, like this one's a little bit fat, I would still trim it up a little bit, give it a haircut. And having a few of these is fantastic for dry brushing and for adding a highlight to anything. So if you don't have a scruffy brush, just like I said, grab one of your cheapest, oldest brushes, or if you've left a brush in paint once and it doesn't look very good anymore, that can become your new favorite scruffy brush. But they're great to have because the bristles need to be really short and dense and then really kind of matted. So that is what I'm going to use to do my highlights and my shadows a lot, are my scruffy brushes. So I'm going to pick up now the blue that I really want you to think his eyes are. So when you guys are looking at your images, like maybe this is where you want to add something subtle, maybe you want to add a little sparkle, maybe you want to add, I don't know, maybe it's Halloween picture and you want to do some red in the eyes. This is where you're going to do this. So the pop color that we're going to put in here is what people are going to think that eye was. Okay, so if I put aqua there, and then later on you look at this and I say, what color were his eyes? You're going to say aqua, because this pop color we put in here is really what's going to steal the show. So I am going to, I didn't dispense anything really all that spectacular. So let me see if I have something else handy. Nope, that's it. So we're just gonna, he gets aqua eyes. So I'm just picking up a bit of aqua paint. On my paintbrush. Let me show you that. So I'm going to pick up a bit of the aqua and I'm going to work it into the bristles a little bit. But now the main thing is without water this time, okay? So no water this time. And then now I really want to work that paint into the bristles by rubbing it on my paper towel. And now I'm going to go in a second time and I'm going to load up the bristles again. And I'm going to work it into the paper towel. So now my bristles are just holding the very driest amount of paint. No, it's still a bit much. I want this to be super dry, so I'm going to go in again and just remove that. And now I'm going to go back in. That's much better. And I'm just going to scrub that color into the surface. And it should look like subtle and slow. It's not a big heavy deposit of color. There we go. That's nice and light. And then what I'm going to do again is I'm going to load up. This time I've got the aqua, push that into the bristles, and I'm going to just pick up a little bit of white to even get a lighter version. And I'm going to really dry that. Like I want my brush so dry. And then I'm going back in and I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle. So a little more contouring on that eye. Now the top of the eye is just begging for a bit of color, isn't it? You guys see that? Like now it's just like you've got that actual white of the eye and then the color in the eye. And now the rest is just saying, please give me a little paint. So I am going to do the same process, but now starting to look at the color of the skin. So in some of you guys have very like makeup based photos. I noticed Dulce had like a model and Tom had a model, and so their eyes are probably all about eyelashes now and stuff like that. I have obviously a very natural eye because I have a 1-year-old in front of me. So just start to look at the colors of the eyes and look at the skin. And so that's why we started with the white of the eye, because most people's eyes are white, right, around the outside. Now you're going to have to start looking at colors. So in this image, his eye looks very like it's a skin color, but it's got like a lot of red to it, a lot of purple to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold up my palette again so I can show you how I'm going to make this. So I'm going to take a little bit of this maroon color that I have, and I like it. I think that's a nice color actually. And then beside it, I'm just going to pick up some of that dark charcoal. And when I mix those two together, this is why I do a circular palette, right? So I can easily say, oh, I think it's got a bit more red to it. I can just pick up a little dot of red, and I just keep mixing until I start to see the right shade appear. And this one looks like it needs just a little bit of black and a bit more of this maroon. And I think I might be close to having my darkest dark. There we go, it's perfect. So that, when I talk about it, you'll hear me talk about that a lot in other workshops as well. That's a circular palette to me, so that I can always just take and add and keep mixing until I get the right color. I often hear a lot of feedback from people saying that, oh, I'm terrible at mixing colors, or I'm terrible at, I always say, as long as you have like a very varied palette, how do you like that? If you have a very varied palette, then you can always just take a little bit of everything. And it's very COVID friendly right now, because you just use what you've got. You don't have to run out and buy the right shade of anything. You probably have it just by picking up a little more of this and a little more of that. And that's why I work in subtle amounts, because you don't want to be mixing a half a cup of paint here trying to get the right color. So now I'm going to go in and I'm just pointing, yeah, that's the right eye. Okay, so now I'm going to go from the top. So turn your board, you guys, so that you're working sort of with the eye the wrong way, because I find it awkward to have my hand across the eye when I'm trying to cut up in towards it. So I'm cutting up in towards the eye from the top. And I'm just laying down the darkest dark where it shows up in this image. So, and you can see without any blending, I'm going to put a little under the eye here, even though he's not old enough to have those kind of marks yet. I'm just going to put it there because I know that that would be a bit real. So you can see how campy this looks, right? So this is, unfortunately, this is the place where a lot of people that are trying to paint eyes and trying to paint detail would stop, because they don't know how to blend this. But you guys know better, because we've been through this now. You're going to take a clean brush, dip it in water, and if you have to keep cleaning brushes, that's okay, because I've got so many brushes on the go here, I don't know which one has paint anymore. So if you have to take one of your brushes and just clean it, that's fine. And then you're going to dry it on your paper towel, right? That's all we need to do, get the water out of it. And now using that brush, we're going to blend outwards.
Christina?
Is there a question?
Yes, please. It's Margot.
You have to type it. I can't hear anybody. So I
Okay.
think Margot may be talking because I see a little green circle. I can't hear you guys, so you have to unfortunately type it in the chat. There we go. So I'm just subtly blending from the outside. If your brush is too dry, just do the same thing. Dip it in water. And then blot it. And then just kind of like makeup, you're just sort of erasing and moving that paint around. So we don't want to go back onto the eye though. Oh, my magenta on top was kind of a rust brown. And then I picked up a bit of black. I picked up a bit of charcoal. I picked up a bit of dark blue. And then I picked up a bit of red. And then I went back to adding more of the rust brown. So yeah, it's a lot of a lot. That's what I was talking about in the circular palette. I really don't know how I make a color until it looks like what I want to do. Now you see what's happened is I've let that other side dry. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to soften it with a bit of water. So you'll hear me talk about this a lot in every workshop, is that water is highly corrosive to paint. So what that means is by me letting that soften up a little bit, all I did was get a little bit of water in my brush and I just moistened that paint. So I've kind of reactivated it, but it's not going to work just yet. I need to let it soften up a little bit. If I go back in, I might start to destroy the fibers of the paper. So Margot, did you see that? You need to press mute afterwards. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to soften that. And if you ever find you have too much color or you've deposited too much or it looks too anything, grab a baby wipe or if you have a Q-tip and just kind of wet it and blot that out. Okay, so in my case, because I let that dry and it's a little harsh, I'm going to go in with a baby wipe and I'm just going to soften that line because it's just a little bit too much. There we go. Okay, so now on my brush, there we go. Now on my brush, I picked up just a little bit. I wanted to see how that would soften it and it looks cute. So I picked up just a little bit of that color, which was my base. So that barnyard, that barn red. And I got that in my brush and I'm just going to work it into the bristles as we do. Dip it in some water, work it into my bristles and then blot. I don't want a lot of color on here. So it's the same thing. We're just basically, you're just staining your bristles. And now you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to bring some of that color to the outside. And then down here as well. And then clean your brush or take a clean brush, dip it in water, and do the same thing. We're just moving this around by blending super subtly. I'm going to carry that pinky color kind of under the eye as well. My toddlers have very pink skin. All right. And no eyelashes. Like he hasn't got a single eyelash in this picture. I'm sure he must have had eyelashes. He's very blonde, but you can't see them in this picture. So now I'm going to pick up, so just play with your colors, adjust them, that sort of thing. I've kind of ruined the bottom of the eye, so I'm going to flip this around so that I can see it. And I'm going to clean up that line. So I'm going to do a combination of, I'm going to start with the dark color, and I'm just going to see if I could just extend that a little more without him looking like he has pink eye. And then, even though it's not in my picture, I'm just going to clean it up a little bit so that it looks more natural. Okay. Yeah, I kind of ruined the shape a little bit by painting upside down. So just adjust, clean it up. You guys have subtle, subtle, subtle lines. Do you have cartoons? Do you have issues? So do we see how subtle this is? Like it's a very, you're depositing such a little amount of color at one time. And you're always observing, right? We're looking at what we've done versus what the photo is. Like that eye is looking pretty sweet compared to the other one. So if you look at this one, right, it just looks really dark and blurry and that sort of thing. And this one's looking pretty nice and crisp. So that is, even though this one, like I said, I had to exaggerate some of the lines, it's okay. That's your artistic license that you're taking right there, right? We're playing with our colors and we're being more subtle and that sort of thing. Now I have the face that that I want to blend into it, and then, but you can see in my picture I don't have a lot of contrast. So you guys are probably noticing that in your own now. Like it's easy to, once you see all the subtleties, like when we say that skin is flesh tone, right? You don't just go and buy a bottle of flesh tone and then paint the whole thing one color, because you're going to see what happens. It's all flat. We have to see the subtleties in the shape. And the shape is just nothing but the same pigment in the skin, but with highlights and shadows based on contour. So we're actually dealing with contour here. So this is often a mistake because people will go and just paint the whole background flesh and say, there, it's flesh tone. But then we can't see the subtleties anymore, right? We're using this as a paint by numbers, so we need to start replicating the colors that's there. So I tend to go with the darkest first, because then when I use my darkest colors first, then I can always go in with my scruffy brushes and I can put my highlights back in. I don't deposit as much color on the face as I do on the eyes. So the reason for that is because I can't generally, it's my own, I don't know, my blind spot is blending the subtleties and the contours of face. So I tend to just add less paint. That way I don't have to deal with that as much as is maybe necessary. So your pictures are all going to dictate what you're going to do first. I'll walk you through mine, but then follow along and do yours. So I'm going to start with the darkest part, and I'm going to see if I can find my other image, because when I'm working upside down, I find it a teeny bit hard to see. There we go. So I'll prop up my other picture so I can see the subtleties. So he's got these dark shadows under his eyes, as you can see, which is just contour, right? A little bit of puffiness. And then he's got like a hooded eye. So it's hard to see, obviously, until we start to look at those things. So if you have to hold your eyes back so that you can see it, it's going to help you, it's going to help provide you that contrast that you're going to need to see. And then I could go in and mark it first with chalk or something. Like if you need to actually put those contours in, you could use a piece of chalk or something like that. I wouldn't use a pencil necessarily because you'll never get rid of those lines. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take another brush. This one is much bigger than the ones I've used on the eyes. So I'm going to use this brush that's got, this one has an angle. I don't know, it'll probably serve me okay. If you only have rounds or flats or whatever, don't stress it out. Just use what you've got. And I'm going to mix up, and I need to put these side by side so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to mix, let me move this over, my flesh tone. Okay, so I'm going to put it this way so you guys can see how I'm going to mix flesh tone. So I am going to pick up my closest thing to it first, which is pink. If you guys don't have pink, start with white, start with cream, start with whatever you've got. So clearly that is not the color of his skin. So now I'm going to start to pick up just a little bit on the tip of my brush and mix it in a little bit of yellow. Yellow is going to be a brighter color, right? Add a little brightening to the skin. Pick a bit of orange. And I'm talking about I'm adding the slightest amounts. Because if you add too much, you're going to change that whole value and you're going to have to almost start over. Still way too pink, so I'm going to pick up a bit of that rust color. And I'm realizing that I'm making it too pink. So I'm going to pick up a bit of brown and mix that in. Oh, we're getting there. That's a nicer shade. Put a little bit of that yellow back in. So I'm just continually adding tiny, tiny bits of paint until I get the right shade. That's why I said you don't want to mix like half a cup at a time, because you're going to end up with a lot of one color. So this is where the circular palette again comes in handy. So that's a good light. But now I need to take the same thing, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move over to one side of it and start to tint it a bit darker, so that I'm going to have subtleties and shades within the same palette. So that's my lighter, that's my darker. So I'm not mixing the whole thing, just mixing one bit at a time. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that barn red. I'm going to make it third shade. That one's a bit pinker, which is good. So you can see I'm getting very subtle here, and I'm going to pick up a bit of white, and over on this side I'm going to make an even lighter version of everything else. So now what I've got is several different shades within the same family. Whoops, I just added blue. Didn't mean to do that. It's okay. There. So now I've got 4 different shades within the same family, and because I did this on paper, I'm just going to spray it with a bit of water to keep it moist. Your palettes shouldn't be drying up as fast as mine are. And now I'm going to use that palette, prop this back up, and I'm going to start to lay down some of the color. Put this back into view. All right, good. Now, some questions. Everybody following along nicely? It's tricky. I'm not going to lie. We started with something really challenging, but we did that because if we started with something as simple as like an apple or something, and we built up all the shades, then when it came to something really tricky, like doing something real, like not that apples aren't real, but you know what I mean, like something like an eye or something like that, where you might have to add in a bit of reality to it. Now we can. So that was the purpose for starting with something more challenging. So as some of you are noticing how much work it is, and I saw that some of your boards are quite big or your images are quite big, this is where you might start to want to like square off. So even if you just want to tape off one area and make it look highly realistic. I don't have a very good painter's tape, but if you had a painter's tape or something, you could completely mask off to get a nice square image. This painter tape tends to, that one tends to destroy paper. So I won't do that, but if you guys want to just tape off one area, then you could get a nice crisp, like square kind of thing, and then you could even do wax on top of that or whatever. Okay, so what I want to show you was loading up your brush. So it's the same technique. We're going to load up our brush with the darkest color we've made in the same thing. Just push it into the bristles and then take a paper towel and blot it out. So this is going to be a little more like applying makeup because it's not going to be as wet. So when we floated the color before with a bit of water behind it, we had a bit wetter brush, but because this one's so big, we're going to kind of do it dry, like a makeup. Eyelashes and eyebrows would be good. Yeah, we'll get to that for sure. So now we're going to put in the color, and then we'll get into, like I said, my son has no eyebrows in here, so we will get into that. Especially, I know, Tom, you have like a model looking picture, right? You've got those sexy eyes. So you're definitely going to want to pay attention to eyelashes and eyebrows and things like that. Yeah, so there's Tom. So that's looking fantastic, Tom. So yeah, you've got those eyes that are, or those eyelashes and those eyebrows that are totally in fashion right now. You've got to definitely do them justice without them looking like a Groucho Marx kind of picture. Okay, so I've got my dry brush, which has lots of paint, just very dry in there. In fact, if I were to put it on my finger, I don't have any paint at all coming off. But when I start to move it into here, what I'm doing is I'm applying it so thin and so just kind of dry brushing over top of the darker areas that it's picking up the texture. This is hard for me to explain to those of you who don't have the tooth of the Liquitex clear gesso, but your dry brush will actually pick up the texture within the space of the like those little microscopic spaces that we get from that Liquitex gesso, the sandpaper. It really picks this up nicely when you're just dry brushing. So on the slipperier side, if you've had to use like a gloss medium or something like that, it might be a little more challenging for you to scrub that color in. But basically that's all we're doing. We're applying it like makeup. It's so thin and we're just scrubbing. Just thin, 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 thin. And you see what's happening? So under this eye, I actually have a natural highlight that is being caused from the paper. So even when I go over to this side, which I haven't painted yet, and I painted in the natural color of the paper is giving me that nice contour that otherwise would be hard to find and hard to pick out if you were doing it afterwards. That's why I start with the darker one, because the darker shade, we're just scrubbing it in ever so gently. And then we're going to do the same with the next color. So we're going to start to build up our contour by adding a bit of the lighter. So I'm going to dip my brush, now that I've scrubbed in the dark everywhere that I want it. Scrubbing, scrubbing, scrubbing. Super dry brush, right? Like it's just like makeup. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up the second color. So going over to my silly little palette here, I'm going to pick up my next color. So this one's a bit pinker, so I'm going to go for that one. It's drying really fast on my paper because I've got paper. But I'm picking up the second one and doing the same thing, working it into the bristles and then really drying it on the paper towel and then doing it a second time if I have to. But I'm working that color into my bristles. I do not want to have paint on there. I just want the bristles to have that color in them. So that, like I said, if I were to put that on my hand, it's very dry and I'm not depositing color. But if I were to put this in a clear glass of water, I would turn my water that subtle shade of pink. Okay, so now I'm going in and I'm doing that. Whoops, I should turn it towards me. I'm finding that that angle is a little bit better for me if I turn it towards me to get the angle correct. So you guys do the same, turn your board as necessary. Pick up more color if you need to, do the same thing, dry it, dry it, dry it. And then start to add your color, deposit your color based on the contours that you're observing. So this takes a really keen eye for observing the subtleties that are within sort of a common color field, right? So even though we're talking about flesh tone here, we're really looking at so many shades of flesh. It's not just one color at all. I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint, but I unfortunately have to put it on my palette because it's just drying out too fast in here. Bear with me for 1 second as I remake some of my color. Okay, yes, I'm just remaking my color. Could put a little piece of plastic on top of it so I don't end up drying it out as fast. I think it's the light that I have on here so that you guys can see even better. It's drying out my paint pretty fast. So again, I'm just going to scrub, 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 make sure the bristles are just depositing a slight amount of color. And now I'm going to refer back to my other picture. Because I'm painting upside down, it's a bit more challenging for me to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to look at my other picture. If you have the, if you have another picture too, you can always keep that nearby. Following up and under the eyebrows. That's where things are darkest, unless some of you who have fashion pictures, right? You've got probably a lot of makeup and stuff going on up there. So observe, observe, observe. All those colors, all those subtleties. And you'll know when you put a color down on top of something, if it's like really harsh all of a sudden, you think, wow, that was way too dark, then you know that you have to go back and put a different color in that area, deposit a different color. That's the beauty of doing this in such small increments and subtly, is that we're able to just watch and go, oh, that didn't go right on top of that color. And that's the paint by numbers part of it, is that we're able to pick out where the highlights and shadows and contours naturally fall on a face. And every face will be essentially the same, as we're all human beings, but everything is just so different. I'm going to pick up a lighter one yet again, and I'm going to start to scrub that in. I'm noticing my color a bit pink. You guys notice a bit pink? Adjust your color. Pick up a bit yellow, pick up a bit of white, pick up a bit of whatever it is you need, and then just start to adjust. So even if you have, like, maybe you've gone wrong and your whole thing has become a bit pink or something like that, that's okay. You can always go back in, and by changing one thing, right, like I'm changing the highlight now to just a bit more yellow. I don't know if you're able to see that, but it's really adding
Hi,
a nice
Christina.
warmth
We can't
to it
see you.
instead of the pink. So like under the eye, which before I had very, very
We can't see you.
pink because it is a toddler.
Christina, we can see you.
Oh, we've disappeared? How have we disappeared?
Yes, you did.
Am I back? Am I back? Am I back?
You're
Don't know what happened there.
back.
Yes, okay. So just to be on the safe side, I'm just gonna go grab a charger. Maybe it's like warning me my phone's low or something. So 1 sec. Okay, I am back. I'm just plugging in my phone in case that is the issue. There we go. Okay, I'll get the cord out of the way and flip you back down. Excellent. Great, okay. This little cord out of the way and we're good to go. Hopefully that was the issue. Thanks, you guys. Good. Okay, perfect. Thank you for bearing with me. Technology is never totally my friend, but so far, not too terrible. Not too terrible. Okay, get the light in here. Okay, so you see these contours? They're really starting to give the shape to the face. So this is where those little subtleties, I'm just dry brushing a little light highlight in here. This is where those subtleties that if you know the person you're painting, it's where it becomes a bit more challenging that you want to look at it and step back and really make sure you know who you're painting, because it's these little contours that come out of the highlights and the shadows that determine the shape of someone's face. And if you've gotten the shape of the face wrong by the contouring, it will become very evident. So I would say before you, I mean, unless you've mastered this right away, I wouldn't start doing any commissions just yet, because it does take a bit of time, this contouring thing and applying the color, because it really can make or break the entire, like the entire aesthetic of the person, especially if you know them, right? So, like I said, before going out and taking any contracts on this or doing any commissions, I would really make sure that you nail this part first. So, even though I haven't painted this eye, I'm finding that I don't want to mix the color again twice. So I'm just going in and I'm highlighting the other side at the same time. So now you can see this side of that eye, like one just has life and the other just looks like a bottomless pit, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit about eyebrows, eyelashes, and then also those little contours and little highlights and little things which can help it look completely natural and can also make it look completely fake. So, so pay attention. All right, so my image is not that clear, so I have to add in a lot of things to it. So the eyelashes, I'm going to put in some eyelashes just to show how we're going to do that. But the thing is, if you don't have well made up eyelashes, meaning if you don't have a supermodel on your eyes, on your image, then you probably can't see a lot of that facial hair, right? Very clearly. Eyebrows, and well, eyebrows are a little more obvious, but eyelashes, you can't usually see those because without makeup on them, they're pretty light. They don't have the bulk that the makeup will give them. So obviously I don't want to paint eyelashes on here to make this 1-year-old look like he's got makeup on. So I'm not going to use a brown or a black, especially because he was super, super blonde. But in order to show it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a little bit of brown mixed in with my flesh color. Okay, so it's going to be very, very subtle, and I'm using a very fine liner brush. You could have a tiny, tiny liner brush. And the reason I'm going to use the brown, like I said, is to add just some hair so that you can actually see what I'm doing. But at the end of the day, I don't really necessarily need to do that. So what I'm doing, if your picture is clear, you can see that there's a little ridge, right, between the skin and the eye where it's flat. And we don't normally see that unless we're looking up super close, but there's a little flat ridge that exists of the skin when it goes back in. The hairs come out of that flat ridge. So what I'm doing is I'm painting in that flat ridge, even though it doesn't exist in my picture. And I'm doing it super subtly, but in a model wearing makeup, that ridge will be almost camouflaged by the hair that's in there. So like I said, it all depends on your individual image, but I'll soften it with a wet brush again because I find it a little harsh. There's that little flat ridge. It is. Okay, now the hairs are going to come out of there. So again, you want to wet your brush, pick up your black or your brown or whatever color the hair would be. Like I said, I can't use too much black because it's going to look entirely strange on mine. So I'm going to do a bit more brown with a bit of, it's almost like a blue. But I'm going to do it really short, whereas you guys might want to do a longer hair, right, depending on whatever you're doing. This is also a great place to get creative with your colors if you're doing something that you wanted, like if you want to do sparkles on the end or something like that. So you'll paint them in first and then you'll add your sparkles. So it might be a fun spot to play with that. What I'm going to show you on here is how I'm taking the paint. So I've applied my paint. Can't remember where it is. It's been so subtle. And I'm just dragging my brush in a circle. You see that? I'm rotating my brush and I'm dragging it through, but it's got a lot of water and colored paint in it, and I'm just dragging it in a circle motion. What that's doing is it's creating a fine, fine, fine point on my brush without a lot of paint. And then from within that space, we're going to start to put the hairs in. And they are so, 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 so subtle. And don't forget, I'm painting upside down, so they're going to follow the contours. They go from that middle of that little ridge down. Drag my brush again to create a fine little point. Mine's almost like more like a dirty water than it is a paint. Have some of them crisscrossing, right? Eyelashes are not as perfect as we think they are. Unless, of course, you got a supermodel in front of you, in which case they work very hard at making them perfect. Now we're going to do the same thing to the top. But on mine, I've already created a dark ridge because the ridge isn't the same, right? The ridge is kind of like in the little fold. So I think I might just leave mine as is. And if you need to darken it up, let me show you how to do that. You just pick up a little bit of your dark color that you've got, your black or whatever you've got in there. Again, wet your brush, drag it out, and then crisp up that line a little bit. So it's just if you need that contrast, because we don't want the eyelashes to look like spiders at the end of the day, right? We just want them to blend all in. So I'm just adding a little ridge there so we have a little bit of contrast. And now I'm going to do my little color thing again. I'm mixing mine with brown and a bit of the flesh color, because I want mine to be super subtle. But just observe what your eye model is doing. And again, same thing, you want to get your brush loaded up and then drag it in a twirling, because we want that paint to be more like dirty water and super subtle. And we're just going to go from the inside out. Be sure when you get your first row in to go in and start to add some in a bit of different directions, a few different lengths. And then we're going to add in our eyelashes if you want them. So mine, I feel they're a little bit heavy for a 1-year-old. So I'm going to take a brush. I'm going to get it wet and blot it. And now I'm just going to go and I'm going to subtly erase. So what that's doing is, remember, water is highly corrosive, so my brush is very wet, or sorry, very dry, but it's got a little bit of moisture in the bristles. And by dampening the bristles and dampening the eyelashes, I'm subtly erasing them. I don't want them to be all gone, but I want them to be so faint. So if you've created spiders, this is a good way of softening them up. First pass with your water or with your wet bristles, you're just softening. Second pass, they're getting a bit softer. Third pass, fourth, fifth, you're just kind of softening them and almost erasing them. Okay, now I can't actually even see where the eyelashes are here, because I guess it was so fair that I'm going to have to totally fake in some eyebrows. And I'm going to look at the picture to see, I'm going to use, if I look here at the original picture, I'm going to use the contour as my cue for where eyelashes are. So on one of them, on one of yours, I can't remember whose it was, but somebody had like those big dark eyebrows that are full of, there you go, those eyebrows. So those ones, it's easy to see them, right? You have no issues seeing the eyebrows. On mine, not so much, but I also don't want it to look like he's got these big dark eyebrows at 1-year-old that he didn't actually have. So I'm going to show you, you could do it in different ways. So one, if you had the patience and also the time, and the eyebrows that were really fine, you could do it the same way we did the eyelashes, which is just like get a really fine brush and then just put them all in subtly. If you still have them visible in your image, it's even better, because then you could just add in 1 or 2 and leave the rest kind of in the background. You can play with that. Because mine are absolutely non-existent here, I'm just going to take a bigger, wider brush, the one that I used for contouring, and I'm just going to add a little bit of like blonde hair color. So what does that actually mean? I don't know. I'm going to take a bit of brown, I'm going to take a bit of white, I'm going to take a bit of yellow, I'm just going to add a bunch of colors and see if I can come up with something that, I don't want his hair to look like straw, and I don't want it to look like it's, you know, golden or anything like that. I'm just going to make up a color. Which kind of looks okay. Okay, it's kind of a gray. And now I'm going to get rid of a lot of the brush. So the same way, a lot of the paint onto my paper towel, the same way I did for the rest. And then I'm going to try and, like I said, follow the contours of a hooded eye and just start to put in the color. So I'm putting it on again like makeup, but just not blending it as much this time, leaving it a bit scratchy. And then if I wanted to then take a brush, like we did for the eyelashes, and do them, you know, put them in much more with intent, I could then just take that and put it right over top of this somewhat scribbled in area. Have it on that side too, so you can kind of see it. There. So now that might give me a better area to go in and do the fine hairs. So if I wanted to do some fine hairs, which I don't, but I'm just going to show you guys just so you could see in a contrasting color, I could then start to put them on top. Okay, I don't want them, so I'm just going to blot them out. And I could leave one or two if I wanted to. I'm just going to soften them. Okay, so now what I want you to do is, and this is, we're getting to the end here. We're crossing the finish line. I just want you to look at it and see where there's some areas where you could make a highlight or a shadow. And this part, I find it really fun. It's easy to overdo, so just be a little more careful with this. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of my darkest blue on my brush, and then I'm going to dip it in the water, and I'm going to make a nice little fine point on my brush. And I'm just going to look at my original photo, and where I have some of the darkest darks, I'm just going to lay down a little line. I don't need a lot. I don't need a lot because, again, if we outline things, then we end up making things look like a cartoon. So I'm just going to add a bit of dark where I feel it might be necessary with the dark. Again, don't outline, just do a few spots. And this is really helping to deepen that eye. There we go. So that little part did a lot. And then if I'm looking at my picture, it's right in here, there's a little dark spot. So that's all I want to do. And now, conversely, I'm going to do the same thing with the highlight. Also notice there's a little spot in the eye. I'm just going to go back up here to the skin. I didn't see it before, but it's pretty subtle. So if you pick up, if you notice something like that in the skin where there's definitely a contour missing, go back in with your darkest flesh tone or something close by. So I'm just going to pick up my darkest flesh tone. And there's a little fold in the eye here. And on this one, it comes up and over like that. So it's a little harsh, but I'm just going to let it sit there for a second. I'm going to grab a brush, do the same thing before as I did with all the blending. Get a clean brush, get it wet, Take out the extra moisture from a paper towel and then subtly soften. It's those little contours which make somebody recognize their relative. It's those little things when you say, oh, that's the shape, right? The shape comes from those tiny little subtle things, those little additions that seem inconsequential, and all of a sudden you see it. And that's what I think makes for good portrait painting and stuff like that, which, as you guys can see, there's a lot of patience in this, right? So I'm just going back in, and now I'm adding a bit of highlight. So I'm going to add, I did the dark already, right, with the dark line, and now I'm going to go back in with the white, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now again, careful with the white. If your white is really, really, really white, then just soften it with a bit of whatever you have, like a tiny little bit of flesh color or a tiny little bit of brown or something else will make it look less stark, right? We just want to add these tiny little highlights, sparkle in the eye, the little highlights, and they are oh so subtle. So this is where, if you have like those obvious lines in the eyes, if they really focus in and you've got this macro vision of an eye, then this is where you might want to go back in and add that stuff, those little lines. And now observe again your contouring, see how you did. If there's any areas you want to highlight or make darker, again, you just take your brush, load up the color, scrub it out in a paper towel, and go back in, scrub, scrub, scrub. And adjust any contours as necessary. So if you guys were able to follow along and do both eyes at one time, awesome, good for you. If you've only done one, you definitely have something like on mine to compare to, right? One side just looks like it's not even an eye. It just looks like a dark hole all of a sudden. And then the other side has so much life. And then there's a bit of contour brought back to the face, which wasn't there because my picture wasn't very good. So I could decide to finish up that eye, or maybe if I'm tired of this, I might give him a pirate patch or something like that. But we'll see what happens with this one. I don't know if any of you have any questions that are pertaining to this, but I want to just tell you that what is going to make the difference in all this is just practice. So I'm going to flip the camera up so I can see you guys again. Hey, 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 there we are. So yeah, look at that, right? Oh my gosh, that looks way out of scale. So yeah, that's much bigger than normal, but you can see one eye is very clear and very well painted. The skin, you see how subtle that skin is? I'm going to, I don't know if you guys can read my text, if people are texting me. There we go. So you can see that eye. It's clear, it's got a lot of depth. The face has contour that the face didn't have before because my image wasn't great. And it's subtle and that sort of thing. This side, that's the actual image that was there, except I did add contouring to the face. But you could see the difference. You see how you could just totally play with that? If I were to change that eye, I could just scrub in a little bit of dark blue or a little bit of aqua. I could scrub in any color I want. I could totally change that. If the white of your eye is too white, like if I had done both of these, absorb them and say, maybe it could use a little bit of an off white. So over time, our eyes do change, right? They're not as white. Some days your eyes are more white than others. So you can change that by adding a little bit of a dirty brush, right, to something else. And just, you don't have to change the whole white, but just the whitest part right around the eye. You might want to change that to a different tone. So the adjustments are going to be super, super subtle that you make at this point. Practice will make perfect, obviously. It takes a long time. I did start you guys with one of the most challenging things I think you can do is with a face, and especially with eyes. It's really hard. So, but now you've got it, right? It's the same thing. You want very little paint in your brush, very, very little paint. You've almost coated each little bristle with a bit of color, and that's what you're depositing with no water. If you add it with water, then you get a watercolor, right? And we don't want that. We just want a little bit of, you can't see me anymore. What's going on? You can't see me? No? Oh, now I'm good. Okay. So, I don't know why I keep cutting in and out. Okay, so anyway, that wraps up this workshop. Like I said, if you're looking at these two, you see the difference. I can easily adjust now. I can easily make an eye look more like what I want it to look like. But in any context, all of you did eyes, congratulations. That was really, really tough. You started with the hardest thing. And then obviously the contours of the face, subtle, super hard. But now you could do anything. So let's say you wanted to put in a photograph of, like within your work, you wanted to embed a photograph of an animal or something, and you don't know how to paint that animal. Put the photograph in, do the same thing, protect the image that you've glued in, and then just start to very slowly paint on top of it. And then we addressed the other day how to soften the edges, but by combining those two things together, painting on the inside and then painting on the outside, you really can make your images look masterfully incorporated into your mixed media. So I hope that was fun for everyone. It's way more technical in class than I normally do, but I do find it to be a bit of a fundamental. And it is a skill set that does require some patience and some practice. Oh, I'm glad you had fun. So yeah, it does require some practice, but you will find that when you do want to incorporate that one thing, I'm just looking at a nest here, and it was funny because I taught a class once in painting nests, and the eggs are what was the challenging part for everyone. It's because everyone did these globs of egg, right? And we didn't have enough time to spend on contouring an egg. So now you guys understand the subtleties of contouring. Even though robin's egg was robin's egg blue, it has so many shades of robin's egg blue, right? So thank you all for joining me. As soon as I'm done here, thanks Judy. As soon as I'm done here, what I'm going to do is send you all the links so you can download it to your computer and you'll have it. Those who weren't able to join us, they'll be able to watch it later. Glad everybody had fun. Please post your pictures, especially even if you only have one little thing done, right? Like just post anything that you did, something maybe you found troubles with. I'm super happy. Put it into Facebook, into our group, and it will be really, yeah, good for you guys. I just have to keep saying that because this is really challenging and it's not something, yeah, you do need a drink, I believe you. It's not easy. It wasn't easy. It's really stressful, especially when we're getting tedious, right? Like tedious work is hard. So yeah, enjoy your weekend. Next Friday, we're doing something entirely different. I'll talk about that later, but we're basically just going to meet back here in Zoom, but this time everybody who wants to be on, we'll just do a full-on Q&A. I'll do demos, that kind of thing. It'll be more social time. So I think that every once in a while we need that. We've been very serious on Fridays at getting our work done and that sort of thing. So let's just have something a little more relaxed. Okay, bye everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, please post what you can. Bye-bye. If I know how to end this thing, I'll say goodbye. If I don't, then leave.